Hey guys, welcome back to my channel Silent Ruptor. I am uploading videos of 1 hour duration only. However, I am thinking to complete Necromancer of the Shadows in 3 more long videos. Or should I just upload this 1 hour episode? Let me know your thoughts in comments. Consider subscribing to the channel and leave a like on this video. Now without wasting any time, let's dive into the story. In the central area of the first layer, just a few thousand kilometers away from the pillar of half-golden and half-black light, a 50-meter-tall monster that looked like a mammoth was sleeping soundly. The monster's entire body was covered in light brown fur, 2 10-meter-long tusks were coming out of its mouth, and its 25-meter-long trunk was coiled around its tusks like a snake. Suddenly, the long trunk of the mammoth, which was very sensitive, twitched slightly as if it smelled something. The giant mammoth slowly opened its deep red eyes, and the aura of a peak rank 3 monster immediately engulfed the surroundings. The mammoth lifted its giant head and looked up. Upon looking up, the peak rank 3 monster saw 2 streaks of light, one red and one purple, coming towards it at rapid speed. Looking at the 2 streaks of light that were coming towards it, even though the mammoth was a peak rank 3 monster, it felt all its instincts screaming and urging it to run away. The mammoth was one of the strongest beings inside the tomb of the ancients, and it was the first time it had felt something like this. As it was the first time its instincts were screaming like this, it didn't know how to respond, and it just looked at the streaks of light which were getting closer. In just 10 seconds, the 2 streaks of light crossed a distance of a few thousand kilometers and stopped a few hundred meters above the mammoth. The moment the streaks of light stopped above it, the pressure of the rank 3 mammoth that covered the surrounding area immediately disappeared, and the figures of a red-skinned demon with 2 horns on top of his head and a handsome-looking middle-aged man appeared in front of the monster's eyes. "Can you feel it?" Eldracar asked after stopping above the mammoth. Baphomet nodded his head upon hearing Eldracar and looked towards the pillar of light with narrowed eyes. Both of them obviously didn't stop here because of the mammoth. While coming here, they already encountered a few peak rank 3 monsters and many other groups of low-level monsters, so it was impossible for the mammoth to attract their attention. The reason both of them stopped was the same reason as to why the mammoth was sleeping here and wasn't proceeding towards the pillar of light. "Although it's invisible to the naked eye, I can clearly sense that the area ahead of us is filled with a high amount of eldritch energy," Baphomet said in a low voice as he looked towards the pillar of light, trying to see what was inside it. Unfortunately, even though he was a rank 6 core evolver, he still couldn't see what was inside the pillar. Eldracar was also looking at the area ahead of them with a serious look on his face, his eyes flashing with deep purple-colored energy. "The void space of this area is filled with a high amount of eldritch energy," Eldracar suddenly said, his eyes fixed on the area ahead of them. "You mean?" Hearing Eldracar, for a moment, Baphomet's eyes opened wide. "Yes." Eldracar nodded his head, confirming Baphomet's guess. "The eldritch energy that filled this area is just a small amount of energy that spilled out of the void space due to the high concentration of energy inside it." "Damn, just what kind of thing can fill the entire void space with eldritch energy to the point that the energy is simply spilling out of it?" Baphomet muttered with a frown on his face. Eldracar didn't answer Baphomet's question because he was also stunned by the discovery. Even the rank 5 eldritch creature they fought couldn't fill the void space with eldritch energy to the point that it started to spill out into normal space. Could it be the work of a rank 6 eldritch creature? Eldracar thought inwardly as he used even more void energy to observe the void space. After a few minutes, Eldracar suddenly noticed something and a stunned look appeared on his face. He stopped using his void energy to observe the void space and looked towards the pillar of light. After looking at the pillar for a few seconds, he once again used void energy to observe the void space around the pillar of light. The eldritch energy that filled the entire void space in this area is actually coming out from that pillar of light, Eldracar muttered in a low voice while looking at the pillar, wondering as to what was inside it. Baphomet was stunned when he heard Eldracar, and the way he looked at the pillar of light completely changed. Before, he was not concerned about the pillar of light as he had enough confidence in his strength. But after hearing Eldracar, he could tell that the thing inside the pillar of light might not be simple. If he were not inside the tomb of the ancient, he wouldn't have cared about the things inside the tomb, as he would have been able to use his full power without any restrictions. But inside the tomb, he and Eldracar couldn't use their full power, or the entire dimension might be destroyed. Things would become tricky if the thing inside that pillar of light is a rank 5 or rank 6 eldritch creature. Baphomet thought inwardly and looked at the pillar with a pondering look on his face. Suddenly, Baphomet noticed the rank 3 mammoth below them, and his red eyes shined a little. Until now, he hadn't noticed the rank 3 monster, as it was too weak in his eyes, and he couldn't be bothered with it. But after hearing Eldracar, he wanted to know a little more about the pillar of light, and the monster below him could provide some information. Without saying anything, Baphomet took a step forward and instantly appeared in front of the giant head of the mammoth. "Hey, little guy, I want to ask you something." The peak rank 3 mammoth's intelligence was not low, so when Baphomet appeared in front of it, the monster obediently lowered its head in submission, because it could feel that the red-skinned demon could kill it with just a flick of his finger. "Good." Baphomet nodded in satisfaction upon seeing the mammoth lower its head and asked in a light voice, "Tell me everything you know about that pillar." The mammoth couldn't speak normally, as it had never come into contact with any other human or species besides the monsters since its birth. But Baphomet was communicating to it using his spiritual senses, making it easy for the giant mammoth to understand him. Upon hearing Baphomet's question, the mammoth didn't hide anything and told him everything it knew about the pillar of light using its spiritual senses. According to the mammoth, every 3 months, the eldritch energy that Baphomet and Eldracar felt earlier would fill an area of a few thousand kilometers around the pillar of light. During this time, if any monsters, including peak rank 3, try to move towards the pillar of light, they will lose their minds due to the influence of eldritch energy and become mindless monsters. But the eldritch energy that fills the surroundings of the pillar of light won't last forever and will disappear after the 3-month period is over. Once the eldritch energy disappears, an area of about 1 kilometer around the pillar of light will be filled with a different kind of energy for the next 3 days. And this energy attracts all the monsters towards it. The mammoth didn't know what kind of energy it was, but it told Baphomet that all the monsters who felt this energy would feel a natural urge to go towards it, as if they would become more powerful after absorbing it. Due to this natural urge to become powerful, the moment the eldritch energy disappears and the second energy fills the surroundings of the pillar of light, all the monsters present in the center area of the first layer rush towards it regardless of their rank. Baphomet and Eldracar, who heard the mammoth, were baffled because they didn't expect to hear something like this. Both of them looked at each other and instantly noticed the gleam in each other's eyes. The strange phenomenon of eldritch energy was quite strange, but what attracted their attention was obviously the strange energy that could trigger the natural urge of the monsters. The mammoth was a peak rank 3 monster, but even it was attracted by this energy, which means it was definitely not something normal. Both of them were already rank 6 core evolvers and didn't need this energy, but they could still use it to make their faction more powerful. After becoming the rulers of their own races, making their respective factions more powerful was their top priority, especially in the current situation where both of them knew that someone related to the Shadow Monarch, or in the worst-case scenario, the Shadow Monarch himself, is roaming freely. "So, did you become more powerful after absorbing this energy?" Baphomet asked with a look of interest on his face. Hearing Baphomet, A bitter look flashed on the giant face of the mammoth and it shook its head. I have tried many times to reach the area affected by the energy, but I was never able to reach there, so I don't know if this energy can make me more powerful or not, as I was never able to absorb it. You were not able to reach the area affected by the energy. Both Eldar and Baphomet raised an eyebrow and looked at the mammoth with a puzzled expression. Don't tell me you are one of the weakest monsters here and can't even approach the area affected by the energy due to the other powerful monsters. Eldar said, looking at the mammoth with disdain. The mammoth's giant eyes twitched upon seeing Eldrakar's disdainful look and it shook its head. No, I am one of the most powerful monsters here and there are not many who can fight against me. If you are so strong, then why were you never able to absorb the energy around the pillar? Baphomet asked with a frown. It's because of the Guardian. Guardian. Both Eldar and Baphomet narrowed their eyes upon hearing this and felt things were not as simple as they seemed. Yes, there is a person who guards the surroundings of the Pillar of Light and doesn't allow anyone to approach the energy and absorb it, the mammoth said in an irritated voice, clearly showing his hate towards the Guardian. Eldar and Baphomet looked towards the Pillar of Light and even though they were a few thousand kilometers away, they could still clearly see its surroundings. I can't see anyone there. Me neither. Both of them tried to find the Guardian the mammoth spoke of, but they couldn't see anything. Seeing Baphomet and Eldar trying to search for the Guardian, the mammoth hurriedly spoke. The Guardian only appears during the time the second energy fills the surroundings. Hearing this, Baphomet and Eldar stopped looking towards the Pillar of Light and looked back at the mammoth. Eldar took out a crystal from his storage ring and showed Evan's image to the mammoth. Is this person the Guardian you're talking about? Seeing Evan's image, the mammoth shook its head. No, it is someone else. Eldar frowned upon hearing this but did not say anything and put away the crystal. What do you think? Should we go towards the Pillar of Light or look for this guy? Eldar asked after putting away the crystal. Their primary goal in entering the first layer was to search for Evan. After entering the first layer and seeing the Pillar of Light, they immediately headed towards it because it was the most eye-catching thing inside the first layer, and they thought Evan might have headed towards it as well. While coming here, they looked for him, but unfortunately, they were not able to find him. Baphomet was silent after hearing Eldar. He thought for a few seconds and finally spoke his mind. Let's go towards the Pillar of Light. There are still more than 10 days before the tomb closes. We can look for him after uncovering the mystery of this pillar. Eldar nodded his head, agreeing with Baphomet as he was also thinking the same. They gave the mammoth one last glance and without saying anything, dashed towards the Pillar of Light. It's good that I didn't bring Biscuit. Otherwise, it would have been impossible for it to survive here, Evan muttered to himself as he pulled the Moon's Edge sword from the head of a peak rank 2 monster. Upon reaching the central area of the first layer a few days ago, Evan noticed many monster groups with no shortage of rank 3 monsters among them. Biscuit was just a beginner-level rank 3 monster and it was very dangerous for it to come here, so to keep it safe, Evan told it to go back once he reached the central area of the first layer. Although Biscuit wanted to follow him, it knew that it would be very dangerous for it to move into the central area, so it didn't urge and went back. Although it's not long since I parted with that dumb bird, I'm already starting to miss its barbecue, Evan said with a sigh as he thought about the barbecues made by Biscuit. He jumped down from the top of the peak rank 2 monster he had just killed and the shadow energy inside his core moved. Shadow Resurrection. He used his Shadow Resurrection skill, and in just a few seconds, around 50 new Shadow Undeads rose in front of him. Among the 50 Shadow Undeads, only 8 were rank 2, while the rest were rank 1 monsters. After becoming a beginner-level rank 2 core evolver, the number of Shadow Undeads Evan could save reached 30,000. The current number of shadow undeads in his army was a little over 9,000, so he was taking every opportunity to increase their number while moving towards the Pillar of Light. It had been 2 days since he fought against the sand lizard, and during these 2 days, he had covered quite a bit of distance and was not far from the Pillar of Light. Turning peak rank 2 monsters into shadow undeads costs quite a bit of primordial shadow energy, Evan said with a shake of his head, and summoned back all of his new shadow undeads into his shadow storage. The group of monsters Evan had just killed was relatively weak, so he didn't use Shadow World to stop the energy waves as the battle ended in just a few seconds. Allora, let's rest for a bit here before we move forward, Evan said, looking at Allora, who was hiding behind a sand dune. Hearing Evan, Allora came out from behind the sand dune and walked towards him. With the help of one of his shadow undeads, Evan created 2 ice chairs, a table, some cutlery, and sat down along with the little red-haired girl. After sitting down, he took out the cooked meat of a beginner-level rank 3 monster from his shadow storage, and both of them started to eat. The meat of the rank 3 monster was full of world essence, and even though Evan couldn't refine it properly due to not having enough time, it still helped him increase the rank of his core slightly. According to the information I received from Team Black, I will have to face a peak rank 3 monster in order to get near the Pillar of Light. Evan thought inwardly as he took a bite of the golden brown meat. Before leaving the cave, I had decided to let Allora deal with the peak rank 3 monsters, but after experimenting with my zone during the past 2 days, I feel like I can deal with a peak rank 3 monster myself. Though, I will run out of void energy, primordial shadow energy, world essence and spiritual power in less than 5 seconds. During the last 2 days, Evan had used his shadow undeads only when he encountered a group of monsters that had rank 3 monsters. If the group of monsters only had rank 1 and rank 2 monsters, he dealt with them by himself, as he wanted to test the effect of his zone. And honestly, his zone turned out to be more powerful than he initially thought. His choice to use the Void Senses skill to create his skill domain completely changed his zone, and after experimenting with rank 2 monsters, he found it was very easy for him to kill them, though the consumption of energy was very high. If he used the full power of his zone, he would run out of energy in less than 5 seconds, and this was the case when he was supplementing his void energy with the primordial shadow energy. Normally, he wouldn't have been able to use his primordial shadow energy to supplement his void energy, as both of them are completely different. But because of the nature of his zone, which was influenced by the Void Senses skill, he was successfully able to use his primordial shadow energy along with the void energy. For quite some time, Evan knew that his primordial shadow energy is made from the combination of different kinds of conceptual energies. Although he did not know about every single conceptual energy that made up his primordial shadow energy, he was aware that there were the conceptual energies of death and soul mixed inside it. Because of using the Void Senses skill while creating his domain, Evan's zone leaned towards spiritual attacks, and because of the conceptual energy of soul mixed inside his shadow energy, he found that he could empower his zone using his primordial shadow energy. After finding out that he could empower his zone using the primordial shadow energy, he tried many things and finally created a skill that uses his primordial shadow energy, void energy, spiritual power, and world essence. All in all, the skill he created using his zone combined all of his available energies into one. He had used this skill while fighting against a beginner-level rank 3 monster, and the result turned out to be better than he thought. The only drawback of this skill was that after using it once, all of his energy reserves would drop to the very bottom, and he would have to wait at least 12 hours to return to his peak condition, as the recovery speed of his primordial shadow energy and spiritual power was very slow when compared to the recovery speed of world essence and void energy. After using this skill to defeat the beginner-level rank 3 monster, I didn't use it on any other monster as I didn't want to waste 12 hours to recover my energy once again, so I don't know how effective it will be against a peak rank 3 monster, Evan thought inwardly and glanced at Allora who was eating beside him. Seeing her eating peacefully, a sigh escaped from his mouth and he shook his head. If this skill doesn't work, I will have to ask Allora to fight against that peak rank 3 monster. Given enough time, Evan was sure he would be able to kill a peak rank 3 monster using his shadow undeads, just like he had killed the mid-level rank 3 scorpion when he went to the location of the time liquid. However, unlike that time when he used a few days to kill the monster, he couldn't afford to do the same now because he didn't have enough time. In just a few days, the tomb would close, so it was impossible for him to waste a few days of time on a single monster. Let's hope it works out, Evan said to himself and quickly finished his food. After eating, he rested for an hour and then once again moved towards the Pillar of Light. During the past 2 days, he had covered a great distance and was now very close to the pillar. He estimated that if nothing unexpected happened, he should be able to reach the Pillar of Light by the end of tomorrow. After walking for around 5 hours and avoiding a few groups of monsters to save his energy for his fight against the peak rank 3 monster, he finally reached his destination. Damn, when I saw this guy through my shadow senses, I didn't feel its aura, but looking at it with my own eyes, I can finally feel just how powerful this guy is. Evan, who was hiding behind a small sand mountain using the invisibility effect of his shadow walk skill, muttered inwardly as he looked at the sleeping monster in front of him. The monster sleeping in front of him was nearly 15 meters tall, had 2 black wings, the body and long tail of a lion, and the head of an eagle. Yes, the monster in front of him was a griffin. Before I came here, I thought my chances of winning were 50-50. But after feeling its aura, I'm not so sure anymore, Evan said inwardly and shook his head. He looked at Allora, who was standing beside him, and signaled her to stay hidden. Evan didn't know from whom Allora had learned the art of concealment, but once she receded all of her aura, it was very difficult for people to sense her presence. After becoming a beginner-level rank 2 core evolver, his spiritual power received a big boost and almost reached the limit of mid-level rank 2, just slightly weaker than a normal peak rank 2 core evolver. But even with his current spiritual power, he couldn't sense Allora's presence if she tried to hide herself. When Allora saw Evan was telling her to stay hidden, she nodded her head obediently. Seeing Allora nod, Evan took a deep breath and his eyes turned sharp. Let's end this as soon as possible. Looking at the sleeping griffin, Evan took a deep breath and stopped using the invisibility effect of the shadow walk skill. At the same time, he released his aura and walked out from behind the sand mountain, heading towards the monster. The moment Evan stopped using the invisibility effect of the shadow walk skill and walked out, the eyebrows of the sleeping griffin fluttered and it opened its dark yellow, eagle-like eyes. Evan didn't try to launch a surprise attack on the peak rank 3 griffin because he knew it would be useless. In the central area of the first layer, there are hundreds of groups of monsters, and all the groups have hostile relationships with each other. In this kind of environment, where you are surrounded by enemies, it is simply impossible for someone not to be on guard, especially during sleep. So, although on the surface it may have looked like the griffin was sleeping without any care in the world, in reality, it was very vigilant. If Evan had tried to launch a surprise attack, it would have immediately woken up and used its strongest means to eliminate the threat. But if, instead of launching a surprise attack, Evan exposed himself in front of the griffin wouldn't immediately attack him. Instead, it would first calculate the threat level Evan posed to it and deal with him accordingly. For the monsters in the central area of the first layer, it is very important to preserve energy to keep themselves safe in case something unexpected happens. If the threat level is not high, most of the monsters don't use their skills and simply kill the enemy using brute force. Evan was hoping that after seeing he was just a beginner-level rank 2 core evolver, the griffin would lower its guard, and he would get a perfect opportunity to launch his attack. After opening its eyes, the griffin immediately looked towards Evan, and seeing a bug-sized, two-legged animal daring to enter its territory, its eyes turned cold. When the griffin sensed Evan's presence earlier, it thought a monster had come to cause trouble. But after seeing it was just a beginner-level rank 2 guy who disturbed its sleep, the griffin was quite angry. When Evan saw the griffin looking at him, his body stiffened, and he felt a mountain-like pressure bearing down on his body, making it hard for him to move forward. Damn, I knew a peak rank 3 monster would not be easy to handle, but to think just by using its aura it can stop me from moving. Evan cursed inwardly as he looked at the griffin with fake fear on his face. When the 15 meters tall griffin saw Evan's fearful expression, an amused light flashed inside its deep yellow eyes, and it started to walk towards him with a haughty look on its face. With each step the griffin took, Evan felt the pressure on him intensify, but he tried to remain calm and waited for the perfect opportunity to launch his attack. Soon, the griffin was just 20 meters away from him, and Evan had to circulate his primordial shadow energy to bear the pressure of the griffin. At this point, the griffin was releasing its aura without holding back, and seeing Evan still standing without dropping to the ground, its giant lips curled upward in a threatening smile, and it looked at Evan as if it were looking at a rare toy. Suddenly, the pressure the griffin was releasing disappeared. Evan was surprised when the pressure from the griffin disappeared, but before he could sigh in relief, the monster once again released its pressure, making Evan stumble because of the sudden onslaught. Damn, this bastard is playing with me, Evan thought inwardly as a cold light flashed inside his eyes, but he did not take any action because it was not the right time. Facing the powerful pressure, he just showed a fearful expression and acted as if he was about to faint due to pressure. The griffin felt very satisfied when it saw Evan looking at it with fearful eyes. It was still pissed that Evan had disturbed its sleep and wanted to play with him a little before finishing him off. After some time, when Griffin saw that the small guy in front of it was about to pass out, it once again receded its aura, allowing Evan to take a breather. However, this time, when the griffin receded its aura, Evan did not show a joyous expression like before. Instead, a horrified expression appeared on his face as he pointed behind the griffin and took a few steps back as if he was afraid of something. The griffin was stunned when it saw Evan's horrified expression, and upon noticing that he was pointing behind it, it immediately turned its head, thinking someone was there. But upon turning, it saw nothing but the nightly desert. Seeing there was no one behind it, the rank 3 monster immediately understood that it had been fooled by Evan, and a look of anger flashed on its face. The griffin was about to turn around to teach Evan a lesson when suddenly, the surroundings around it started to become dark. The flowing wind stopped, the space around it became disordered, and a terrifying chill enveloped its body. Evan, who was standing not far away from Griffin, looked at the peak rank 3 monster with a serious look on his face. The terrified expression he had been showing to the griffin had long since disappeared, and his deep black eyes were glowing with a purple light. When Evan saw the griffin was about to turn around, he opened his mouth. His void energy, world essence, spiritual power, and primordial shadow energy moved simultaneously. The world around him started to become dark as if he had entered the void space, and 2 words that sent a chill down the griffin's body came out of his mouth. Void rend. The moment Evan's voice fell, the cold breeze flowing within the desert stopped and the fur of the griffin stood on end. The scenery around it changed, and instead of a sandy desert, the monster found itself standing in the middle of a dark place with nothing in sight, as if it was exiled inside a void space where nothing existed. Looking at the dark space around it, the griffin felt as if it was staring into the mouth of a monster who wanted to devour its soul. Realizing something was amiss, the griffin was about to use its skill, but suddenly, it felt a needle-like black-purple spiritual force penetrate its soul defenses and head towards its soul. The griffin tried to mobilize its spiritual power to stop the force moving towards its soul, but the attack was very fast. Caught off guard, the griffin wasn't able to stop it and the attack struck its soul in an instant. The moment the attack struck, the griffin's eyes widened in horror and roar. A painful roar that shook the entire dark space resounded, and under the pressure of the roar, the dark space collapsed like glass. Cough. Evan, who was standing not far from the griffin, coughed out a mouthful of blood and dropped to his knees with a pale face. Roar. Roar. Not caring about Evan, who was kneeling in front of it, the griffin continued to roar in pain as if it had gone mad. "Fuke, I thought I could use the full power of my zone for at least 5 seconds, but I didn't think this griffin's soul would be so strong, and I would run out of energy in less than 2 seconds. Evan cursed inwardly and tried to stabilize his condition. He looked at the struggling griffin in front of him and his bloody lips arched upwards in a smile. Although I ran out of energy much faster than I expected and this guy is still alive, I am more than happy with the result. At this moment, if someone looked at the griffin's soul, they would see small deep purple holes emerging all over its soul like tiny ants, and these holes were eating away its soul. The holes that were emerging all over Griffin's soul were actually small void rifts, and these void rifts were swallowing its soul. The black space where the Griffin found itself when Evan used his skill was obviously his zone. Normally, his zone would manifest as an energy field just like the zones of others, but by empowering it using the primordial shadow energy, his zone turned into a fake dimension, far more powerful than an ordinary zone. Of course, this effect is applicable only when he uses his zone along with the primordial shadow energy. If he uses his zone without the primordial shadow energy, it wouldn't turn into a fake dimension and would remain in the form of an energy field. The Void Rend skill Evan used utilized all the available energies within his body. The Void energy and primordial shadow energy were used to deploy the zone, which evolved into a fake dimension due to the combination of both energies. Inside the fake dimension, the power of his spiritual attack increased greatly due to the influence of the Void Senses skill that he used to create his domain, and the conceptual energy of the soul mixed. Inside his shadow energy, the world essence was used to hold the fake dimension and prevent the Griffin from breaking it instantly. Lastly, using the fake dimension as a medium, his spiritual power was employed to attack the soul of the Griffin. Because Evan used the Void Senses skill to create his domain, he could channel his void energy through his spiritual senses. So when he attacked the Griffin's soul using the fake dimension as the medium, which was essentially his zone, it was not hard to open some small void rifts inside the Griffin's soul using his spiritual power. Although the energy consumption was very high, it was worth it. Of course, if the Griffin hadn't let its guard down, Evan was sure it would have been impossible for him to harm it, as the rank 3 monster would have shattered his fake dimension instantly just by using its powerful aura. The only reason the Griffin was caught inside the fake dimension was because its guard was down and Evan distracted it before launching the attack. Seeing the Griffin rolling on the ground in pain, Evan knew that although its soul was heavily damaged, it wouldn't die from this attack alone. He could feel the Griffin's spiritual power firmly fighting against his void energy, which was rending its soul. If his guess was correct, in less than 10 seconds, the Griffin would be able to erase the traces of void energy from its soul. Although it would be able to erase the traces of void energy from its soul, this didn't mean its soul would recover instantly. The damage caused by the Void Rend skill would still take a few months or even years for the Griffin to recover from. Unfortunately for the Griffin, although it was trying to erase the void energy, Evan had no intention of letting it succeed. Kill it. He gave a mental command and immediately hundreds of shadow undeads emerged from his shadow storage and attacked the Griffin, which was helpless due to the void energy rending its soul. Under the attacks of his shadow undeads, the griffin, which couldn't even stand up, had no chance and was beaten to death within a few minutes. Feeling the life aura of the griffin disappeared, Evan sighed in relief and finally relaxed his body. The moment he relaxed his body, he felt a slight dizziness due to his exhausted energy reserves, and a bitter smile appeared on his face. Now I need to wait for at least 12 hours before all of my energy recovers. Evan muttered in a low voice and put the body of the griffin inside his shadow storage. After putting away Griffin's body, he immediately left that place, fearing that other monsters might come due to the commotion he had caused earlier. After leaving the scene, Evan didn't walk toward the pillar of light. Instead, he retreated because he couldn't move forward without recovering his energy. The place where the griffin had been sleeping was very close to the area filled with eldritch energy, and without his energy reserves, he couldn't deal with it. Allora had told him about the strange phenomenon of eldritch energy around the pillar of light, and entering a place filled with eldritch energy without the protection of his primordial shadow energy and world essence would be a foolish move. After retreating, Evan spent almost 12 hours recovering all of his energy. Once his energy reserves were fully recovered, he didn't waste any time and instantly headed toward the pillar of light, unaware that 2 ranked 6 enemies were waiting for him there. It didn't take long for Baphomet and Eldracar to reach the pillar of light, and both of them landed a few meters away from it. Upon coming closer to the pillar of half-golden and half-black light, they noticed the pillar was emerging from a round-shaped altar approximately 200 meters in diameter. The entire altar was covered by the pillar of light, so they couldn't see it clearly, but the outer edges of the altar were engraved with ancient-looking runes that were clearly visible to them. The runes engraved on this altar are very high level, Eldracar said in a low voice as he examined the outer edges of the altar, filled with tens of different kinds of runes. Baphomet didn't respond to Eldracar as his knowledge about runes was practically zero. Instead of focusing on the altar, he was looking at the pillar of light that stretched thousands of meters high. He tried to see the end of the pillar but saw it disappearing into the sky with no visible end. "Can you feel it?" Eldracar suddenly asked with a frown on his face. "There are 2 different types of energy coming out of this pillar of light." Baphomet raised an eyebrow upon hearing Eldracar and used his spiritual senses to scan the area around the light pillar. After scanning the pillar for a few seconds, he stopped using his spiritual senses and nodded his head. "You are right, there are 2 different kinds of energies. One is coming from the black part and the other from the golden part of the pillar." Once Baphomet confirmed his speculation, Eldracar continued to use his spiritual senses to understand the 2 energies emanating from the pillar. Before entering the pillar of light, Eldracar and Baphomet wanted to comprehend everything about it, as the pillar in front of them was very unusual. Just by sensing the eldritch energy that filled the area, they could tell it was the work of a high-level creature, and if they carelessly entered the pillar, they might encounter unexpected danger. Eldracar continued to scan the energies coming out of the pillar, and after a few minutes, he spoke with an uncertain look on his face. "The energy coming out of the black part feels like a sealing energy, and as for the golden part, it feels like an energy of destruction." Baphomet finished Eldracar's sentence while looking at the golden part. Eldracar was surprised when he heard Baphomet, as he did not expect him to realize the nature of energy without even using his spiritual senses, but when he remembered the demon in front of him possessed eyes of destruction, the surprise on his face disappeared and he nodded his head. "What do you think is inside this pillar?" Baphomet suddenly asked with a curious look. "If you want to know, then just go inside and take a look," Eldracar said in a plain voice and walked towards the pillar. Baphomet also walked along with him, and soon both of them stopped just a meter away from the pillar. Although we are not using the full power of our spiritual senses because of the restrictions of the tomb, I doubt that even by using the full power of our spiritual senses we can see what is inside it," Baphomet muttered after stopping in front of the pillar as he felt the strong sealing force and the force of destruction coming from it. Eldracar nodded in agreement because he could also feel that the pillar of light was special and it wouldn't be easy to see inside it just by using their spiritual senses. Eldracar was looking at the pillar with his eyes glowing in purple when he suddenly noticed something and a shocked look appeared on his face. "This." Baphomet noticed the sudden change in Eldracar's expression and raised an eyebrow. "What's wrong?" he asked with a frown on his face. Eldracar took a deep breath upon hearing Baphomet and said in a voice filled with shock, "I just tried to look at the void space to see if my spiritual senses could enter the pillar of light through it, but upon looking at it, I saw that even the void space in this area is covered by the pillar of half golden and half black light." Baphomet was also shocked when he heard Eldracar and his eyes opened wide. "Even the void space is covered by the pillar of light," he muttered in a dazed voice and looked at the pillar with an uncertain look on his face. For the next few hours, Eldracar tried to find a gap in the void space to see if he could look inside the pillar through it. Baphomet didn't disturb him and just stood aside, allowing Eldracar to search in peace. Unfortunately, even after more than 20 hours of searching, Eldracar wasn't able to find anything. Once he realized he couldn't find anything in the void space, Eldracar stopped searching and looked at the pillar with narrowed eyes. Suddenly, he took a step forward and touched the black part of the pillar. The moment Eldracar touched the black part of the pillar of light, a strong sealing force invaded his body and all of his powers were instantly sealed. "What the?" Feeling the sealing force invading his body, Eldracar quickly pulled back his hand. Baphomet noticed how Eldracar's aura suddenly dropped to the very bottom and his mouth hung open, not believing that a rank 6 core evolver like him turned into a normal person just because of touching the pillar. Even after pulling back his hand, the sealing force that had entered Eldracar's body didn't disappear. Feeling the sealing force flowing within his body, Eldracar frowned and focused on his dragon core, trying to force out the sealing power using his void energy. It took Eldracar 5 minutes, but he successfully forced out the sealing energy from his body. "What just happened?" Baphomet asked with a serious look on his face once Eldracar's aura returned to normal. Hearing Baphomet, Eldracar told him everything that had happened. After listening to Eldracar, the demon looked towards the golden part of the pillar. "Do you think there would be a similar effect if we touch the golden part?" he asked with narrowed eyes. Eldracar didn't say anything upon hearing Baphomet, but from the serious look on his face, it could be seen that he realized entering the pillar of light would be a lot harder than he thought. Just as Eldracar and Baphomet were thinking about their next move, they felt the presence of 2 people approaching the pillar of light. Although it's not visible, the amount of eldritch energy in this area is off the charts, Evan said with a frown as he walked forward, covering himself in the primordial shadow energy. He looked at Allora, who was walking beside him and saw eldritch energy was completely ineffective on her. What in the world is Allora? Evan couldn't help but wonder when he saw eldritch energy didn't affect her at all. He was sure that Allora wasn't human. Even though she looked like one, she had been inside the tomb of the ancient for thousands of years, and no human being would look like a child after thousands of years. Not just her body, but even her mentality was like that of a child who was still growing up. Even species like elves and dragons, who take longer to mature than other species, wouldn't look like a child after thousands of years. Even now, Evan didn't know Allora's actual rank. He tried to sense her rank from her aura, but her aura was very strange and he couldn't discern her rank at all. When he asked her about her rank, she just shook her head and said she didn't know. She is completely unaffected by the eldritch energy, and even when we went to fetch the time liquid, she completely ignored the disordered time flow inside the cave, Evan muttered inwardly and sighed because he still didn't know anything about her. I hope I will get my answers after reaching there, Evan said with narrowed eyes, looking at the pillar of light not far away from him. The amount of eldritch energy that filled the area Evan was walking through was very high. While moving, he felt as if someone had cast Gobu's madness induction skill in his surroundings, and its effects were getting stronger and stronger as he moved deeper. If not for the fact that the amount of primordial shadow energy in his possession had increased greatly after he became a rank 2 core evolver, he was sure it would have been impossible for him to reach the Pillar of Light without becoming mad because of the eldritch energy. From the place where he killed the griffin, the Pillar of Light was just a few thousand kilometers away. Normally, he could cross this kind of distance in a matter of minutes or even seconds if he used his full power. But under the pressure of eldritch energy, where he had to continuously protect himself using the primordial shadow energy, it was not easy for him to move forward at full speed. If he had pushed himself a little, he could have reached the Pillar of Light in half an hour, but pushing himself would have consumed a lot of energy, and in a place where he was uncertain what kind of danger he would face, Evan didn't want to expend too much energy. Since he was saving his energy, it took him nearly 5 hours to reach the Pillar of Light. When the Pillar of Light came into his sight, similar to Baphomet and Eldracar, Evan's eyes also fell on the altar and the runes that were engraved on its outer edges. Suddenly, Evan felt Allora's grip on his hand tighten, and he noticed she was looking at the Pillar of Light with anxiety. "What's wrong, Allora?" he asked in a soft voice as he patted her head. Allora took a deep breath when she felt Evan's hand on her head and shook her head, saying she was fine. Seeing she wasn't saying anything, Evan didn't press her further and continued to approach the Pillar of Light. Just when they were about 200 meters away from it, Evan suddenly felt energy fluctuations coming from the other end of the pillar. The half-golden and half-black Pillar of Light wasn't transparent, so Evan couldn't see what was on the other end, but just by feeling the energy fluctuations, he felt a prickly sensation all over his body, indicating that whatever was on the other end was dangerous. "Father, there are 2 people on the other end of the pillar," Allora suddenly said. 2 people. Evan narrowed his eyes when he heard Allora, and alarm bells started to ring inside his head. "Didn't you say there wouldn't be anyone here during this time?" he asked Allora in a low voice. Allora was also confused when she heard Evan, as it was the first time someone had appeared near the Pillar of Light during the time when the eldritch energy filled the surroundings. Seeing Allora's confused face, Evan shook his head and didn't say anything more. Could it be that someone who entered the tomb also came here? Evan guessed inwardly, thinking about Voidskar and other powerful people who had entered the tomb. Although the possibility was not very high, he felt that if high-level core evolvers like Voidskar and others worked together, they might be able to reach the Pillar of Light. But when Evan looked around and felt the pressure of the eldritch energy, this thought immediately disappeared from his mind. No, it is impossible for them to reach here under the pressure of such high-level eldritch energy that can directly affect the soul of the target. The only reason I was able to reach here is because of my primordial shadow energy that can protect my soul. I don't think other people can come here without losing their minds. Evan was still thinking about the possible identity of the people on the other end of the pillar when suddenly, the energy fluctuations he was feeling disappeared and he sensed some movement. Feeling the movements from the other end of the pillar, Evan's body tensed up and he prepared to summon his shadow undeads. Just a few seconds after he sensed the movements, Evan watched as 2 figures, a middle-aged man and a red-skinned demon with 2 horns on top of his head, walked out from the side of the Pillar of Light. Were discussing his life and death as if they were talking about the price of vegetables at a market. After seeing how easily Baphomet destroyed his rank 2 sword, he knew he wasn't their opponent, so he instantly used his newly gained authority, hoping it could help him in the current situation. As Evan, Baphomet, and Eldrakar looked at the portal. A figure emerged from it and looked around in confusion. Seeing the figure that came out of the portal, everyone's eyes, including Evan's, widened in shock. Inside the primordial shadow realm, 3 black portals suddenly appeared. One was in front of Anastasia's essence clone, another in front of rank 6 Florida, also known as the Angel of Death or the Chunibyo, and the last one in front of Valtair. When the portals appeared inside the shadow realm without her permission, Anastasia's essence clone was startled, and she tried to close them, but her partial authority over the shadow realm didn't work on the portals and they remained suspended in front of the 3 people. Anastasia frowned when she wasn't able to close the portals, but suddenly, she felt a familiar aura from the other end of the portal and her eyes widened in shock. Florida, who was outside of the castle, also felt the familiar aura coming from the portal and was equally stunned. On the other hand, Valtair, who was sulking in one of the corners of the shadow realm after losing to Florida in their last spar, was lying on the ground with an unfocused look. When the portal suddenly appeared in front of him, his eyes narrowed and his bad mood worsened, thinking that someone was forcefully trying to enter the shadow realm. "What is this shishthol now?" Valtair muttered with a frown on his face, looking at the round portal in front of him. He looked around and saw the shadow undead of a rank 1 orc not far away from him. Because of the evolution of the shadow energy, most of the shadow undeads who were below rank 3 had already woken up, and the entire shadow realm was filled with tens of thousands of shadow undeads. Upon seeing the shadow undead of the rank 1 orc, Valtair lifted his hand, and the orc was pulled towards him as if he were made of iron and Valtair was a powerful magnet. Once the orc appeared near him, Valtair threw the orc inside the portal and said in a light voice, "Go and check this shishthol. If you find anything strange on the other end, don't forget to come back and tell me." He said as the orc was pushed inside the portal, and the 3 portals that appeared inside the shadow realm disappeared. When the portal suddenly disappeared, Valtair raised an eyebrow in surprise. It seems the people on the other end were quite weak and that little guy immediately killed all of them. Valtair muttered in a low voice, thinking that the orc had killed the person who opened the portal, which is why it disappeared. Valtair was just praising the orc who entered the portal when suddenly, 2 extremely powerful and cold auras locked onto his body. "Valtair!" The anger-filled voices of Anastasia and Florida sounded at the same time, and before he could understand what was going on, 2 powerful fists landed right on his face. Back inside the tomb of the ancient, Evan looked at the rank 1 orc who just came out of the portal with his mouth wide open. "You have summoned one of the guardians of the primordial shadow realm, beginner level rank 1 orc. Nominal." A notification flashed in front of Evan, making his mind dizzy for a moment. Baphomet and Eldrakar were also stunned when they saw the rank 1 orc coming out of the portal. Earlier, when they felt the primordial aura coming out of the portal, both of them thought that Evan was summoning someone very powerful and they were ready to use their full power regardless of the consequences. But looking at the shadow undead of the rank 1 orc in front of them, who was looking around with a dumb expression, Baphomet and Eldrakar's eyes turned extremely cold because they felt Evan was mocking them. Just what kind of fucked-up authority is this? Evan cursed inwardly when he saw the being he had summoned and quickly tried to think of another way to save himself. Even with the help of his shadow undeads, he was not confident he could escape from Baphomet and Eldrakar. Just from the speed that Baphomet had demonstrated earlier, he could tell that even if he summoned all of his shadow undeads, Baphomet could ignore them and appear in front of him in an instant. Just when Evan was thinking about what he should do, rumble, the surroundings around him began to shake in a terrifying pressure, tens of times more powerful than the peak rank 3 griffin's pressure bore down on him. Cough. Evan coughed out a mouthful of blood due to the pressure and his bones made crunching sounds as if they were on the verge of shattering. The rank 1 orc he had summoned couldn't handle the pressure even for a second and burst into black smoke. Allora. Feeling the crushing pressure, Evan suddenly thought about Allora, who was standing behind him, and tried to turn his head. But before he could turn his head, Baphomet appeared in front of him and lightly punched him in the chest. The moment Baphomet's fist made contact with his chest, Evan felt as if he had been struck by a world-crushing force. Subconsciously, he activated his temporal velocity skill and in slow motion, watched as he flew backward as if struck by a bullet train. His ribcage, where Baphomet's fist had struck, slowly sank down, and all the bones within his chest turned to dust. The fist's force penetrated his heart, causing it to swell up like a balloon, ready to burst at any moment. Cracks appeared all over his skin, and blood started to flow out of his body. Looking at his body in slow motion, Evan was sure it couldn't handle the force of the punch and was about to explode into a blood mist. Sensing his body was about to explode, at the last second, just before his body turned into a blood mist, Evan activated his death transfer skill and his body returned to normal. Although his body returned to normal, he was still flying backward like a broken kite. Boom! Evan's body collided with a rocky mountain about 2 kilometers away from where he had been standing a second ago. But instead of stopping after colliding against the mountain, his body continued to move backward, creating a hole through the rocky mountain and coming out the other side. Boom! With a loud booming sound, his body crashed around 300 meters away from the rocky mountain, creating a 2-kilometer wide and 100-meter deep pit. In the middle of the pit, Evan lay lifelessly, with all his bones broken and blood continuing to flow out of his mouth. His life and death unknown. Oh! Baphomet's eyes narrowed when he saw Evan's body didn't explode into blood mist even after taking his attack head-on, and a look of surprise flashed across his face. Eldracar also raised an eyebrow because Baphomet's earlier attack was enough to destroy the body of even a peak rank 2 core evolver, yet Evan, who was just a beginner level rank 2 core evolver, didn't die from it. My bad, it seems he is tougher than I thought. Baphomet looked at Eldracar, who had a surprised expression on his face, and said with a slight smile on his face, "I will end him with this." As Baphomet spoke, he pointed one of his fingers towards Evan and a small red energy ball started to spin at the tip of his finger. The energy ball was just 1 centimeter in diameter, but the destructive aura it emitted was so strong that the space around it trembled as if it was about to shatter, and the eldritch energy within 5 meters of Baphomet was completely dispersed by the destructive aura released by the energy ball. Goodbye, little imposter. Baphomet was about to shoot the energy ball towards Evan, but suddenly, he felt a strong sense of crisis and quickly redirected the attack, shooting the energy ball to his right side. The moment Baphomet shot the red energy ball, it collided with a golden arrow, and the next second, boom! A colossal explosion shook the area for hundreds of kilometers. The sandy ground collapsed and sank as waves of destruction spread outward, destroying everything in their path. The rocky mountain Evan had crashed against shattered like fragile glass, turning into rock boulders and debris, which were blown away by the shockwaves. The pit where Evan lay unconscious sank even further, burying him deep under the sand and the huge boulders of the Rocky Mountains. Although the explosion was massive, the altar from which the pillar of half-black and half-golden light emanated didn't budge and remained completely unharmed. Baphomet and Eldracar protected themselves from the explosion using their aura and looked with narrowed eyes at the small red-haired girl who had shot the golden arrow. "Who is she?" Eldracar asked with a frown on his face, looking at Allora, who was covered in a blackish-red aura. "She came here with that imposter guy," Baphomet replied while looking at the little girl who was staring at him with anger-filled eyes. Eldracar's mouth twitched in irritation when he heard Baphomet and he wanted to strangle him. "I already know she came here with that guy, but I'm asking, who is she?" "How do I know who she is?" While Eldracar and Baphomet were arguing, Allora pointed one of her fingers at the demon, and a black energy beam shot towards him. Eldracar and Baphomet were stunned by the energy wave emanating from the black light beam and immediately disappeared from their positions, barely dodging it. Both of them appeared around 100 meters away from Allora and looked at her with their eyes wide open. "That black energy beam," Baphomet muttered in a shocked voice and glanced at Eldracar with a questioning look. Seeing Baphomet's questioning look, Eldracar nodded his head with a serious expression. "You are not mistaken. The black energy beam she just released was made of the same sealing force that is coming out of the black part of the pillar." Baphomet's face turned serious upon hearing Eldracar's confirmation, and he looked at Allora with a murderous look on his face. "I don't know, and I don't care who she is, but we can't let someone like her, who can seal our powers, roam freely," he said in a cold voice, and instantly appeared in front of Allora like a ghost. His hands glowed with deep red light and he tried to grab her, but before he could touch her, Allora suddenly disappeared, teleporting right in front of the pillar of light. At the same time, with lightning speed, she once again shot a golden arrow towards Baphomet. The energy waves coming from this golden arrow are similar to the energy of destruction emanating from the golden part of the pillar. Eldracar muttered with narrowed eyes, looking at Allora coldly and wondering how she could use power that was similar to the power coming out of the pillar of light. When Baphomet felt the golden arrow coming from behind, he sneered and tried to move away. But just when he was about to move, his expression changed as he saw his feet were bound by chains made of black energy. Without alerting Baphomet, Allora had left a small part of sealing energy near his feet before she teleported away, and the moment he tried to get away, that small part of sealing energy activated. "Shit, I was careless." Baphomet cursed inwardly and quickly created a deep red shield behind him using his aura. Although he didn't feel any immediate threat from the golden arrow, he still didn't want to be hit by it. Boom! The golden arrow made of destructive energy struck the shield created by Baphomet and exploded like a nuclear bomb. The shield successfully withstood the explosion's power, but Baphomet staggered a few steps due to the shockwaves. While Baphomet was trying to regain his balance, he suddenly felt a small hand touch his back, and the next second, "Seal!" Allora's cold voice rang out from behind him. Whoosh! A large amount of sealing energy invaded Baphomet's body, and all of his powers were instantly sealed. Before Baphomet could recover from the sealing effect, a golden spear formed in Allora's hand and she tried to pierce Baphomet's head with it. Just as her spear was about to pierce Baphomet's head, she felt a strong sense of danger from behind and wanted to teleport away, but when she attempted to teleport, she found the space around her was locked and she couldn't escape. "Do you think I will let you use your power like this, fool?" Allora heard Eldracar's irritated voice and a large hand grabbed the back of her neck, lifting her off the ground. From Eldracar's tone, it was clear he was irritated with Baphomet, who, despite seeing Allora teleport in front of him, hadn't locked down the surrounding space with his aura. If he had locked down the space, Allora wouldn't have been able to teleport behind him when he lost his balance earlier, and his powers wouldn't have been sealed. Allora struggled to break free from Eldracar's grip, and the blackish-red aura emanating from her body became even denser. When Eldracar noticed the dense blackish-red aura, he narrowed his eyes, and the next second, crack! A low bone cracking sound echoed through the surroundings, and Allora, who had been struggling to break free from Eldracar's grip, stopped struggling and her body went limp. Her neck was broken by Eldracar. Crack! With a small cracking sound, Allora's neck was broken by Eldracar and her body went limp. The Void Dragon looked at the small girl he was holding by her neck. His hands turned into dragon claws, and he pierced her heart, destroying it in a single move. After destroying Allora's heart and breaking her neck, Eldracar threw her away like garbage and looked at Baphomet, who was standing not far away from him. "What's wrong?" He asked with a frown on his face. Why are you not forcing out the sealing energy from your body? Do you want it to spread further and sink into your core? Hearing Eldracar, Baphomet came back to his senses and took a deep breath. Honestly, he was stunned because he never thought a small child like Allora would be able to compete against him to such a level. If Eldracar hadn't interfered at the last second, even though he wouldn't have died, he was sure that Allora's attack would have seriously injured him because all of his powers were sealed. Although the reason Allora was able to successfully seal his powers was because he wasn't using his full power due to the laws of the tomb, it was still a serious blow to his pride, and deep down, he was feeling humiliated that he was nearly defeated. I should have been more careful, Baphomet thought inwardly, and a powerful force erupted from his monarch core, trying to drive out the sealing energy from his body. I have become too arrogant after sitting on top for so long that I underestimated my opponent and nearly got my ass kicked by a small kid. Instead of rashly attacking, I should have thought with a clear mind and understood her powers before taking action. Although Baphomet was prideful and arrogant, he wasn't stupid and knew his shortcomings. Even though he wasn't using most of his powers, he could have still avoided having his power sealed by Allora if he hadn't underestimated her. Being a rank 6 core evolver and possessing a monarch core made him so arrogant that he never thought someone other than top core evolvers like Akasha, Eldracar, and a few others could be his opponents. From Baphomet's expression, Eldracar could easily guess what he was thinking, but he didn't bother to say anything. Dragons were even more prideful than demons, and as the ruler of the dragons, Eldracar's pride used to be even higher than the tallest mountain in the world, so he could understand why Baphomet didn't take Allora seriously. But the keyword here is, used to be. Due to a certain incident that happened in the past, Eldracar stopped underestimating his opponents. At least, unlike me, who was almost beaten to death because of underestimating my opponent, he just got his power sealed and didn't suffer much. Eldracar thought inwardly and looked toward the deep pit where Evan was buried with hate-filled eyes. It took Baphomet around 10 minutes, almost double the amount of time Eldracar took to force out the sealing energy. The reason it took Baphomet a lot of time was not because he was weaker, but because the quality of the sealing force Allora sent inside his body was much higher than the quality that entered Eldracar's body. Once Baphomet fully recovered, he looked at Allora, who was lying in a puddle of her own blood, and snorted coldly. He used his spiritual senses to check the place where Evan was buried and soon found him. "That guy is still alive," Baphomet said in a cold voice while checking Evan's condition. Although all of his bones were broken, most of his internal organs were damaged, and he was buried tens of meters deep inside a pit, he still had a little bit of life force remaining, indicating that he was still alive. Eldracar wasn't surprised when he heard Baphomet because he had already noticed Evan was still alive. "Let me finish him." Baphomet was already pissed because of getting his powers sealed by Allora earlier, so he said in a cold voice and was about to move toward Evan's location when suddenly, rumble! The pillar of half-golden and half-black light behind them started to shake, and a blackish-red aura, similar to the aura that was coming out of Allora, started to emerge from it. As the blackish-red aura started to come out of the pillar of light, Allora's body, which was lying in the puddle of her own blood, began to disintegrate into light particles, and these light particles began to merge with the blackish-red aura coming out of the pillar. When Baphomet and Eldracar saw what was happening, both of them were stunned. Although they were stunned and didn't know what was happening, they still reacted quickly and attacked Allora, trying to completely destroy her disintegrating body. But to their shock, when their attacks touched Allora's body, they passed through it as if her body was made of smoke. Eldracar and Baphomet didn't expect something like this to happen, and before they could attack once again, Allora's entire body disintegrated and disappeared. Once Allora's body disappeared, the shaking of the pillar stopped, and the blackish-red aura coming out from it vanished. What just happened? Eldrakar asked with a confused look on his face, unable to understand the reaction of the pillar and how Allora's body disappeared. Baphomet was also confused and looked at the pillar with narrowed eyes. Suddenly, while looking at the pillar in confusion, both of them felt something and looked in the direction where Evan was buried. Eldrakar narrowed his eyes while looking towards Evan's location and asked in a deep voice, "Did you feel it?" Baphomet nodded his head upon hearing Eldrakar and said in a serious voice, "It was just for 1 second, but I felt the time flow in that area was disordered. Let's go and check him out. It must be the work of that imposter." Boom. Eldrakar was still in the middle of speaking when suddenly, a deep black aura burst outward from the pit Evan was buried in, and the sand and boulders that filled the pit were blown away. Rumble. The night sky of the third layer of the tomb started to rumble as if a storm was coming, and a terrifying cold aura that made even Baphomet and Eldrakar shudder filled the entire tomb of the ancient.